Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the annual Forest Growers Research Conference. I hope that everyone enjoyed the sessions yesterday and came away with a new sense of interest and awareness from some of the exciting array of presentations. Today, we're going to start with a presentation from Jason Wilson, who, as most of you will know, was recently appointed as the head of Te Ururako. Following Jason's presentations, we're going to switch gears and focus on the existential issue of climate change. I'd like to start by thanking Jason for taking the time to present at our conference. We certainly appreciate that he is busy with a large array of constantly changing priorities. However, we value him taking the time to outline some of the activity he and his agency are working on. As most of you are aware, the government focus on forestry has changed dramatically over the last 5 years. Firstly, with the establishment of Te Ururako under the coalition government, as well as the initiation of the 1BT initiative, and more recently with the evolution of Te Ururako to Te Ururako New Zealand Forest Service under the Labour government and Minister Nash. In parallel to the changes within MPI released its Fit for a Better World initiative in 2020. Which outlines a strategy for how New Zealand's primary sectors can support post-COVID economic recovery. In addition, Te Ururako was tasked with developing a forestry-specific industry transformation plan, which Jason had previously been leading. Lastly, the Climate Change Commission released its advice to government on how best to achieve New Zealand's net zero 2050 climate commitments. And although many would argue forestry could play a bigger role in achieving these targets, the report acknowledged the critically important role that afforestation will play, as well as looking to diversify New Zealand's energy landscape, placing a greater emphasis on the importance of biofuels and the use of biomass to reduce our nation's reliance on hydrocarbons. Understanding how all of these strategies come together and how the government may respond to the Climate Change Commission report will be critically important to the sector. So I'd like to thank Jason once again for taking the time to talk with us today about how some of the activity he is overseeing in these areas is likely to come forward in the next 12 to 24 months. Following Jason, we will hear from Grace Villamore of Scion, who is recognised internationally for her work in social systems modelling and behavioural economics. Grace currently leads Research Aim 1 of the Resilient Forest Program, which explores risk management and social perceptions related to forestry. In her talk today, Grace is going to present some of the work undertaken within Resilient Forests that attempts to understand the perceived risk regarding climate change and how these factors may influence our response to such risks. Next, we'll hear from Robin Hartley about Scion's recent work using remote sensing systems that not only have the potential to improve the utility of remote sensing, but also increase the accuracy and application of remote sensing within forest management. Lastly, in this session, we'll hear from Ian Hinton of Timberlands. Ian is going to review some of the practical science that Timberlands have been undertaking, exploring the impact of climate change within the Kaingaroa estate. Ian will outline the implications of their studies to date, with a particular emphasis on how it could influence their estate strategy and subsequent forest management. I think collectively these talks represent an incredibly exciting session that clearly shows how collaboration across government, research and industry can all align and not only deliver exciting new research, but also have a practical application for managing forest systems. So without further delay, I will hand over to the first of our speakers, Jason Wilson.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you for inviting me to your conference. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jason Wilson. I'm the Deputy Director General of Te Ururako, the New Zealand Forest Service. Before I go on, I'd like to recognise that it's been a challenging year for many in the sector, with COVID lockdowns, disrupted supply chains and challenging markets, but the opportunity to meet today is an important one. Throughout those challenges, MPI and Te Ururako, the New Zealand Forest Service, has been working with the sector in these challenging times, and we look forward to doing that as we go forward. I'd like to talk to you about a new era for forestry. Over the last 100 years, New Zealand has become world champions at growing logs, and to the point we're now the world's largest log exporter. It was done for a variety of reasons that we planted these forests 100 years ago. This was done to support and protect our natural environment and to stop the use of Indigenous forestry for timber in this country. It was also done to create jobs, and we've been very successful in that, and as I said before, getting to being one of the largest wood products producers in the world and the world's largest log exporter. The decisions and stewardship that was undertaken 100 years ago has put us in this position. And now we have to think about what the next 100 years brings us. Times have changed, we have new issues and new challenges, but it's the dawn of a new era and we're at a crucial point in that time. The government has made climate change a major policy priority, first declaring a climate emergency for the country at the end of 2020, and by making a commitment to being a carbon neutral government by 2025. The Climate Change Commission report in May this year stated forestry is the only option available now for removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere at scale and provide a carbon sink long term. The role for forestry cannot be clearer. In the short term, it's about sequestration, and in the medium to long term, it's about the benefits that forest products can provide in substituting for higher emitting products. That means our sector needs to pivot, it needs to transform, but it gives us the base to meet our climate change commitments. It will include implementing different forestry regimes using different species of wood. An example is the Northland-based totara pilot, which is undertaking feasibility studies for growing and harvesting totara in Northland. This is for commercial reasons, not environmental reasons, but the gains will be both economic and environmental. Transformation also involves different uses for wood and wood products. The right investment, research and innovation will enable New Zealand to become a world leader in using our forestry resources to produce high-tech, high-value products. Initiatives underway such as the Industry Transformation Plan and the Fit for Better World Roadmap provide the framework to create new bioenergy solutions, to increase woody biomass supply and create the supply that will replace high-emitting fuels like coal, and also create new industries and new jobs based on woody biomass. Tūrako, the New Zealand Forest Service, is funding research and innovation products across the country and in regions. These products include the work being undertaken by the New Zealand Dryland Forest Initiatives on genetic improvements to eucalypt species, research by Scion on accelerating primary production in native trees in their nurseries, and Landcare's research investigating into removing social barriers to encouraging planting. Another really interesting project underway is Ngāta Hene Forest Trust work to enhance the Mataranga and cultural values in restoration projects, and Hawke's Bay Regional Council's research for forestry in its region. As we pivot towards being a forest service, research will ensure the advice that we provide is evidence-based. This research and evidence is shared with our partners and stakeholders across the sector, creating jobs, supporting communities and regional economic development. It'll help us enhance the environmental value of our land and ensure New Zealand gets the opportunities, benefits and value forestry provides over the next 100 years and beyond. We recognise the need to work in collaboration with our stakeholders and industry, further understanding the issues and challenges for the forestry and wood processing sector, understanding the gaps and research in knowledge, and using evidence-based research to better provide advice and guidance to the sector. Tūrako, the New Zealand Forest Service's role is to provide guidance, direction and leadership, and to work with organisations such as Forest Growers Research to unlock the benefits and full potential of our forests. Through careful stewardship, we can build the social licence with our partners, the wider sector and all New Zealanders. Strengthening partnerships between industry, government, Māori, the workforce, landowners and regional councils and communities will provide clarity of direction and provide strategies to support the right social outcomes. Work to find the balance between foresters, wood processors, pastoral farmers and afforestations will help communities get the full benefit of the forestry system, including Indigenous and exotic forestries. Our business unit within MPI is now called Tūrako, the New Zealand Forest Service, and is undergoing change. As our name now suggests, the emphasis is on service. And that emphasis is not to be understated. We are currently working on developing the shape and scope of our strategic planning and advisory service. Strengthening and deepening what we do, the Forest Service is opening a better front door for the sector and for everybody. We're planning for it to be easier to engage with us and will be clearer as to what we can offer you. Our insights will be targeted and we'll be working with other agencies so we have a better combined reach. The future direction of Tūrako, the New Zealand Forest Service, is not just supporting plans or policies for more trees. It's about advising what types of trees to plant where, strengthening relationships with stakeholders, leading the development of our sector, and helping deliver the government's Fit for a Better World roadmap. Our plan is to encompass the entire primary sector because future success will require an integrated solution right across the landscape. This is a challenging and exciting time for the wood processing and forestry sector in New Zealand, which is undergoing change and will undergo more change. As I said earlier, we're at the start of a new era and a need to pivot and change to meet a new challenge. Innovation and research will play an increasingly important role to create new skills, new products, markets, and to optimise the economic and environmental potential of wood. By working together, we're ensuring the right skills, resources, service and capabilities are in place to manage our country's forestry resources. We need to be thinking about tomorrow's forests, and we can do this by working closely with groups such as Forest Growers Research. Collaboration with the sector and government, communities and businesses, and local organisations across New Zealand is essential to our work. If we do it correctly, we can be proud of what we achieve now, and when people look back in 50 to 100 years, they'll understand the hard work that was put in now to set up the industry of the future.
I think forestry is really important for New Zealand and the world in general's future because climate change is a big issue and we need to reduce carbon emissions.
Sustainability is a big factor for me. Future generations can do the same thing I do, help and contribute to the iwi.
Looking at the different ways you can use forestry to help address climate change is really interesting.
I actually would love to go back and work with iwi, and I want to show Māori wahine like myself that we can do just as well as the tāne, and Māori can gain higher paying jobs in forestry rather than just manual.
The practicality. We were out in the field once a week for a good 12 weeks.
I didn't even know how to identify different types of tree species before going into this course.
I know 10,000 times more than what I did.
Now I can happily walk out into a forest and identify a lot of the different types of tree species.
It's a pretty full-on course, but it's definitely worth it.
It is much more diverse and I found it a lot more engaging.
You get lots of field trips throughout the week. First we went to Hamner Springs. This year we're going up to Nelson Lakes.
There's just so many avenues that a lot of people don't know about.
Forestry is a great career path.
Forestry is so broad that you can go into basically anything.
Forestry is not just planting trees and cutting them down, there's hundreds of different people involved in the process.
There's the engineering side,
Environmental,
Doing harvest planning.
there's marketing.
You can go into biology.
The business side really stood out to me.
It's a massive process, doesn't just get done in a day.
There's also a lot of work going on in alternative uses for wood, so looking at biofuels to replace things like coal.
and there's all different cultures and ethnicities that are studying forestry science, quite a diverse group of people.
I think forestry is perfect. Lots of job opportunities, good work.
Definitely get involved, try and find places where you can gain experience, and no, it's not all just for guys.
Just go for it.
If you're passionate about outdoors, give it a go.
Te Te Rako New Zealand Forest Service is proud to be partnering with Mairoa Intermediate School to plant trees through our Matariki Te Rako grant. Mairoa Intermediate School will be planting over 500 trees provided for through the grant.
I came to this school as a student, and I can remember the gully was the cricket net, so that's like 37 years ago or whatever it is. And so the gully's always been there, and it's been different things at different times, but it's been a bit of become an eyesore.
The Gully project is for an outdoor learning space for future generations of Mairoa and for people to have fun in, and a happy place and a good place for the environment.
So the Matariki Te Rako grant has enabled us to start a shade house, and in that shade house we've been propagating native plants from seed, and the other thing that it's helped us with is potting mix, seed raising mix. This is some of the manuka that we've harvested. It's also enabled us to purchase some trees to be able to plant down in the gully, and so it's really enabled us to probably triple what we would have been doing. The other thing it's done is we have working bees once a month on a Saturday, and we like to give the people that have come some kaif and morning tea, and so the grant has enabled us to purchase really yummy morning teas.
Yeah.
So it's becoming more popular?
Yeah, last year the maximum we had was like 5 people.
It's really fun just
planting with your friends.
Yeah.
The landscape has changed so that there's more trees.
Yeah, some of them have roots which stabilise the soil, and when rain comes down it won't pick up rubbish and take it into the stream, it will actually support it.
The area around our school is more healthy. And the wildlife.
Lizards.
Lizards, yes.
So many.
We even had to make a new lizard enclosure.
The gully restoration was driven as a memorial to Rob Bigby, who was a teacher in our school for, must have been about 20 years. It would be a really peaceful place to remember a great man.
Also we can look back and all of these trees are like 20 metres high, or the maximum that they can grow. We're just like, oh, we planted all of these.
Yeah, knowing that we planted them will be cool.
These projects are legacy projects. Plant a tree to connect to your city, marae or school. Be part of building a forest, a collective resource which will be enjoyed by communities for generations to come.
Good morning, my name is Grace and I'm from Sion, and today I'm going to present initial output of the Resilient Forest program, particularly on managing risk and uncertainty. So with this presentation, we want to answer the question, how are forest growers adapting to climate change? And today I'm gonna answer or address 3 key questions. 1, why is climate change adaptation is so important? The second, are forest growers adapting to climate change? And what are the risk response measures being planned? And third, from those risk measures that they identified, what factors motivate forest growers to adapt? So let's focus on why is climate change adaptation important. So I'll start with the recent facts and figures in the forest plantation in New Zealand. To date, we have 1.7 or 69 million hectares that are planted in production forests with an average of 18 years of standing trees. And the MPI is also reporting that there are new plantings of 22,000 hectares. Fortunately, forest growers and even these standing trees are exposed to several risks related to climate change. It could be an outbreak of fire, pest diseases, drought, and wind damage. And this will actually risk the potential revenue from these standing trees. In fact, the recent climate change report of the New Zealand Superannuation Fund identified that timber investment in New Zealand has the greatest physical climate-related risks, followed by the rural land, dairy, and retirement care. So with this information we have, it is important to tackle climate change. One might say that, yes, I'm already doing mitigation. Well, that's well done and highly recommended. But we could also reduce the impacts that might also affect your mitigation activities by employing the strategy of adaptation. Adaptation is not just a partner of mitigation, or they say a sister of mitigation, but in fact, it is a parent of mitigation. So the target is to reduce the risks to your existing assets and the system of values. And that's why mitigation is so important. So what is climate change adaptation? Well, it is simply the adjustment of the system or forest system to reduce or avoid negative impacts. And there are 3 adaptation strategies, or general 3 adaptation strategies. This is resistance, resilience, and transition. So a forest manager might select resistance, which is managing the forest for persistence to keep the system the same. While he might also select resilience, which is managing in such a way that when a disturbance comes, it would recover after the disturbance is removed. Or select or take the option of transition, which is managing for change, suggesting that the forest systems, including the social, technological, and economic components of the systems, have fundamentally changed. Well, selecting these options are easy to be said and done because of the many challenges. In reality, we have poor understanding of forestry, adaptation processes, including the drivers and the consequences of those consequence of forest growers' decisions. At the same time, the motivating factors are not only income, but involves cognitive processes. So it's important to capture the human behavior in their decision making. And to date, there is no New Zealand climate change adaptation policy, particularly in forestry sector, nor a roadmap for forest adaptation that would help a forest grower when to stop or when they will go, or even wait until the strategies have seen a positive effect. So with that, this presentation would touch a little bit of the understanding of forest adaptation process, and particularly focusing on the human behavior in decision making. And later on, hoping that it will build on to the development of a climate change policy or roadmap for forest adaptation. So let's tackle the second question. Are forest growers adapting, and what are the planned responses to the risks? To answer that, we conducted a survey, and we have a total of 60 respondents. And these respondents are composed of forest consultants, farmers who have trees on farm, forest owners, as well as forest managers. Interestingly here that the forest managers and consultants are responsible for 70 to 80% of the New Zealand plantation area. So their results or their contribution to the understanding of adaptation is so crucial to establish the baseline. Unfortunately, when we look at the age and the gender, which is the age of the respondents are dominated by age bracket of 55 to 64, and also a bit of 45 to 54 plus the male-dominated respondents, we can see that there's a lack of diversity. Let's talk about what climate risks worries them worries them the most. And the top one among the climate-related risks is market disruption. So it's the impact of climate change. It's 34%, followed by windthrow and wind damage and forest fires. When we look at based on the respondents' role, we can see that both managers and owners are very much concerned of the market disruption, followed by forest fires, quite similar to the forest managers and owners. But most of the forest owners are also concerned of windthrow. When we look at the forest consultants, they're more spread out of this top of climate-related risks. We asked them whether they are vulnerable or they feel vulnerable with this risk, and we see that they are very much vulnerable. 17% are saying definitely they're vulnerable. Almost 50% are saying possibly vulnerable, while very small percent are saying that they are not vulnerable. So with this background, now we can ask, are the forest growers already adapting? And the answer is more than 50% of these respondents are saying that they haven't adapted yet. Only 21% are saying that they are directly adapting. So what are their planned risk response measures? And the top one that you can see on the right is that reduction. So risk reduction, which includes silvicultural activities, timing operations like flexible harvesting or planting resistant species. We have also 27% of the respondents are saying avoidance, which is they try to avoid climate change risk through education and training, increase awareness, and having surveillance, biosecurity surveillance, or setting up policies. 24% of the respondents are saying spreading, which includes diversifying markets, their species and investments, as well as portfolio of clients. And interestingly, there are 16% of the respondents suggesting acceptance, which is they see the risk beyond their control. So they do nothing or no plan of action. And then 4% are saying transfer, which is more of having an insurance. In this presentation, we're going to look at the four top, the majority four activities. And we would like to know what factors motivates the decision maker or the forest growers to select this risk response. To do that, we use this theory, protection motivation theory, which we translated as simple as this kind of equation, that the choice of adaptation response is dependent on the characteristic of the forest grower, the barriers that could be also a cognitive process by avoiding the topic of climate change, postponing their adaptation strategy, inaction, and whether the activity or adaptation option is very costly. Another group of factors is the confidence. looking at whether the forest grower is confident of their self-ability and their belief that the choice that they make will be effective. So with these three factors, playing with these factors, we could see which of those adaptation response will they be selected. So when it comes to reduction, which 27% of the forest growers respondent selected, the main factor affecting the choice of reduction is their adaptive capacity, their confidence of their self-ability, which is significant at the same time positive. When it comes to avoidance or risk avoidance, there are two key factors that influence the choice of avoidance, which is their characteristics, particularly the age, which is significant but negative, and the adaptive capacity, which is significant, but at the same time, a negative aspect. So we could say that those younger forest growers or respondents with less confidence of their self-ability would somehow select avoidance, which just makes sense because avoidance involves activities that increases their awareness, their confidence, through training and education. Another response is spreading, and what is interesting here is that the factor which is climate change avoidance is significant at the same time negative. So they are the ones who are very much aware of the climate change impacts, and that is one of the factors that influence them or motivates them to select the spreading risk or this risk spreading response. But another interesting here is the acceptance, which is 16% of the respondents. Here, the two factors that play is the climate change avoidance, which is a barrier. At the same time, it is positive and significant. While their adaptive capacity is less, or they have less self-confidence. Interestingly, this climate change avoidance is a behavior that increases his vulnerability, which might lead him to a maladaptation behavior or maladaptive behavior. And that makes sense because of less self-confidence, and avoiding the issue would somehow motivate him or her to accept the risks. So with this information, we want to compare whether we are on the right track. So we compare this result with a study in Europe, but this was in 2012. So when we look at it, in Sweden, let's say 10 years ago, Sweden has almost 20% who already adopted. In Germany, almost 50%. So when we compare with in New Zealand, the one who said yes directly is quite similar 10 years ago to Sweden. And if we include the yes directly, which is 26%, we are quite similar to Germany, which is actually 10 years behind. So we could see that we need to do a lot of things to move forward, or to be more, to have more forest growers to adapt. So for the recap, we want to ask the question, how are forest growers adapting to climate change? Well, the answer, it depends. It depends on the characteristic, particularly the age. We see the young ones in the older age bracket. It depends also on their self-confidence of their self-ability of the decision maker. We see also the importance of adaptive capacity of the individual grower as an important motivating factor to adaptation. We see also that risk acceptance has been identified as an adaptation action which may increase vulnerability to climate change due to the lack of self-ability and confidence in the decision makers. And lastly, this work provides the baseline information on the current state of risk perception, including the barriers and enablers of adaptation behavior of forest growers. With that, thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Robin Hartley. I'm an autonomous systems scientist from Scion. So today I'm going to be talking about the work that our team has been doing in exploring the HoverMap laser scanner for forest phenotyping, which is a part of the Resilient Forests Research Programme, which my colleague Simeon has already given an update on. So let's start with phenotyping. What is phenotyping? To break it down, it's an emerging science which uses techniques like laser scanning to compare tree form with genetics, environment and silviculture to identify optimal trees for specific locations. In forestry, we're starting to use this for tree breeding and selecting the correct genetic stock for our forests. So for assessing tree form, the method is the same as we'd use for log grade prediction, mensuration, and this is what our research has been focused on. So what metrics are important? Things like diameter and height we can use to predict volume of a stem, and attributes such as branching, sweep and defects tell us about the value of the tree stem. So what do we currently use for tree form assessment? We use traditional tools such as a hypsometer, a diameter tape, a height pole, and the good old iometer. But what are some of the issues with this method? Well, the iometer is very subjective for metrics like sweep and branch sizing. Plot-based metrics involve a lot of averaging, and there's also inherent bias in measurements like tree height for various reasons. Throughput is also an issue because there are only so many trees that a crew can measure in a day, and that's just not going to get us to precision forestry. So why should we change these methods? Well, in our team we're focused on automation, so we see a forest with autonomous UAVs flying through the forest on a regular basis capturing data, and this will be at the tree level, so we can move towards true precision forestry. This will reduce errors, remove subjectivity, and also hopefully fill increasing gaps within the labour market. We're aware that today's technology won't necessarily give us all the answers, but we know that automation has to start somewhere, and the harvesters that we see in today's forests didn't appear overnight. As an alternate method, terrestrial laser scanning has been explored in forestry for more than 2 decades. Findings are promising, and the measurements that you get from these units are very good. But to get a full 3D model of a stand, the plot must be scanned from a number of angles. The diagram in the middle shows a typical plot setup. The 5 blue triangles represent the scanner positions. The 6 yellow circles represent the 3D targets that need to be set up to align the scans. So there's a lot more equipment being carried into the forest, and the scans must then be processed and aligned prior to any analysis being carried out on the point cloud. So this is just a slightly clunky method and not quite ready for commercialization. So why can't we use airborne laser scanning or LiDAR from a plane for phenotyping? Scion has researched laser scanning from above the forest canopy for a number of years, and what we found is that scanning from UAVs and planes doesn't scan the stems due to the dense forest canopy. Sub-canopy scanning is the opposite. It actually gets very dense stem scans, but there's less canopy definition. So the image here speaks for itself. On the left, we have a typical high-density capture from a plane. The UAV capture in the middle gives us a bit more definition, but we're still not seeing the stems. And then the sub-canopy scan on the right gives excellent stem definition and branching, but we're just maybe not seeing the tips of the trees. So with the advent of mobile laser scanning, there's been a bit of a step change for forestry, and we can now scan while moving within the forest. So Scion started researching the utility of these units back in 2014, and the findings were pretty good. The scanner range and accuracy did let it down a little bit though, and we could only scan up to about 10 meters vertically. In the past 3 years, there's been a lot of innovation in this space, and we've worked with a number of companies to trial their units. We hosted Emercent at Scion 2019 to look at their new hovermap scanner and tested it within one of our genetics trials. And we found that the combination of being able to capture data sub-canopy with this scanner that could autonomously fly through the trees was the way that we wanted to go with our research. So far in the Resilient Forest program, we've been exploring the state-of-the-art Regal Minivux laser scanner, and our previous work has found this to be a highly accurate unit for measurement of the forest canopy, including metrics such as height. With the hovermap, we now have the ability to fly below canopy, so we want to know what metrics we can derive from that and how accurate these are. Though both UAV mountable, these scanners are actually very different. The hover map uses SLAM, or simultaneous localization and mapping algorithms, which build a virtual environment from the LiDAR points on the fly, which it then uses to both build an environment, build a point cloud, but also assist the craft in navigating safely through the trees without hitting things. The Minivux relies on a GPS signal, which it can then assign a real-world position to each of the points that it's scanning. This data can then be post-processed into a point cloud, through which The Minivux is also more of a passenger, so it's not integrated into the craft and telling it to avoid objects, it's just collecting data. The other key differences include the scan arrangement. So the Minivux laser hits a rotating mirror and spins on a 360-degree plane, kind of like a Catherine wheel. However, the hover map has 16 lasers which spin on 2 axes, which gives it a full 360-degree spherical coverage, kind of like a disco ball, which fires points everywhere, which is exactly what we need for flying below the forest canopy. You'd think this would make it the superior scanner. However, it should be noted that the Minivux has a much higher quality laser. The range is nearly double that of the hover map, and its beam footprint is nearly 20 times smaller than the hover map. So what does this mean? It basically means you get a lot more points in your point cloud, but there is also a lot more noise associated with it. For this research, we collected data with both the hover map sub-canopy and the Minivux above canopy. We also collected pre-harvest inventory at 3 sites, a genetics archive at Scion, and 2 sites in Kinleith Forest, where we installed a total of 48 pre-harvest inventory plots. The inventory data was collected by a commercial inventory crew and included metrics such as diameter at breast height, height on every tree, sweep and branch size. The data set comprises over 2,000 trees with a diameter at breast height range from between 1 and 65 centimetres and heights ranging from 1.5 to 36 metres. But we didn't want to give up on airborne scanning at this point, so we wanted to see if it was possible for us to capture more information on the tree stem from above by using the Minivux. And we flew this elaborate flight plan in 8 directions, low and slow, over our genetics trial to see what we could get. The flight plan is here at the bottom left, and it achieved about 1,800 pulses per square metre, which is nearly 20 times what you could expect from a commercial airborne LiDAR capture. For the sub-canopy data, we wanted to trial the hover map in all 3 of its modes. So first we tried it as a backpack-mounted scanner, which gave us a pulse density of about 22,000 pulses per square metre, which is roughly 1,000 times more than your commercial plane-captured LiDAR. The 2 autonomous flight modes that you can use with the hover map from a UAV were also trialled. So the first, the semi-autonomous flight mode, allows the pilot to fly manually under the canopy, but it has this industrial-grade objects avoidance, so the craft can't fly into things. The fully autonomous mode is similar, except it's a waypoint-based flight mode, which means that you can just select a point on a map and the craft will fly to that point. What we're seeing, though, is that the backpack is by far the most efficient way of capturing and processing data at this stage. With 1 battery, we were able to walk an entire 2-hectare block up and down every row of trees, which took about 45 minutes. This created a single file, which was then processed, and we were able to get a point cloud developed within about 5 hours of starting the data capture. With the different autonomy levels, battery limitations of the craft held it back slightly, because you had to land the craft at the end of each row to change batteries, which created a new data file. And we found this led to large amounts of extra processing, and the semi-autonomous took about twice the time to create a point cloud. The fully autonomous took about 6 times that of the backpack to create a point cloud. There are other UAV options on the market which have better battery efficiencies, and we're currently looking into these. So once we have the point cloud, we can then start to derive some metrics. First of all, though, we need a processing pipeline to input the raw hover map data and pull out something more usable. So first of all, we classify the ground and then height normalize the data, which removes any hills in the terrain and makes the point cloud more measurable. Next, we denoise the point cloud with various algorithms, and then we fit spheres to the stems with other algorithms, which allows us to segment out individual trees and create a tree map. Once we have these individual trees, we're then able to calculate some metrics. So first we looked at diameter at breast height, and we found a very strong correlation, an R-squared of 0.94, between the hover map and the field measurements. There is some error, an RMSE of approximately 6% or 2 centimetres. We also tried this with the Minivux, but as you can see from the two diagrams at the bottom, which show slices through a tree stem at 1.4 metres, the hover map was collecting a very good stem profile, whereas the Minivux just didn't have the point density, even at that higher density flight. So despite appearances, hover map actually gets very good treetop coverage. It's just a lot lower density at the tips. The transect at the top right shows hover map data in colour overlaid on Minivux data in grey, and you can see that they're both reaching the same heights. We found a very strong correlation between Minivux and hover map data with an R-squared of 0.94. The key point here is that this potentially means we no longer have to fly above the forest canopy to derive heights with laser scanning. The correlation between both scanners and field data, however, was very poor, and the scanners significantly overestimated many of the tree heights. When we looked into this, we found that a lot of the overestimated trees were actually suppressed or dead trees. And the heights were coming from the neighbouring tree branches which had overgrown the tips of the dead trees, and the peak detection algorithm was picking these up instead. When we removed these from the data, the correlation improved an R-squared of 0.42, which is much more significant. But this does highlight the issue with using peak detection for tree heights with this data, and we're currently exploring alternate methods. Additional metrics that we've looked into include algorithms for basic stem straightness, things such as kink, wobble, and sweep measurement. We can also output a stem profile which can be input into YTGen to predict log grades. This stem profile can also be used for extracting measurements like taper and stem volume. We're also working on algorithms to characterize branch size and structure. But one of the major limitations that we're seeing is that the algorithms only work up to about 13 meters up the stem, and then the density of the stems decreases to the point that the algorithms stop working. And we think this is because of the density of the branches obscuring the tree stem. To address this, we've developed a method called CloudReg, which allows us to fuse sub-canopy with above-canopy data, and ongoing analysis as part of this research will evaluate whether this helps us to characterize the full tree stem. We've successfully applied this method to our red needlecast research within the Resilient Forest program, and we can now scan a plot, which then gives us the ability to tie in remote sensing and field measurement at the individual tree level. Previously, when we relied on GPS, we could only get to the plot level, so this is a big breakthrough. To summarize, we can automate forest phenotyping, and we can nearly do this with UAVs. It's just that battery life is slightly limiting, but smaller trials are possible with autonomous UAVs. We're definitely on track with our aim of being able to extract tree form metrics from LiDAR by 2024 as well. And to conclude, above canopy laser scanning can be useful for crown and terrain modelling, but at this stage not for stem description. HoverMap is showing a lot of promise as well. The backpack is operational and is being offered commercially by Interpine. We're working on a data pipeline that will be able to automate phenotyping trees too, to hopefully reduce subjectivity and increase throughput. There's a lot more research to come in this space, so stay tuned. So we'd just like to acknowledge FGR and MB for funding this research. And we'd also like to thank Mike Baker and Hancock Forest Management for access to Kinleith Forest for our trial setup. We'd also like to acknowledge Toby Stovold and Kane Fleet for access to Science Genetic Archive. We'd like to thank Russell McCandlish and Forest and Woodlot Inventory Services for capturing the inventory data. And we'd also like to acknowledge our partnership with Interpine to explore HoverMap autonomy for forest applications. There's a few references here if people would like to explore more of our research in this area. And yeah, I'd just like to say thank you for your time today.
Kia ora and good morning. Not that long ago, a colleague of mine said that they felt that climate change would be net positive for the forest industry. Increased temperatures and higher CO2 concentrations would lead to improved growth and hence improved profitability. Climate change will show its face in a number of different ways, and after listening to this presentation, hopefully you will see a different face of climate change. The problem for us wasn't climate change per se, it was actually harvest recoveries. So that's the relationship between the volume that we were predicting and the volume that the harvesting crews managed to put across the weighbridge. What we found about 10 years ago was that our harvest recoveries fell, and they fell in ways that we were unable to explain fully. Initially we thought it was related to mechanisation, and it would just take some time for our harvest crews to adapt to the new methodologies. Over time our harvest crews adapted to the new methodologies, but our recoveries didn't improve. And over time we weren't finding that volume sitting on the cutover. Anecdotally, there was also more trees standing dead when the harvest crews went into to clear fell than our inventories were actually telling us. And more recently, certainly over the last 3 to 4 years, we've found that our growth models were no longer predicting accurately growth. What we were finding is that our growth models were tending to over-predict the volume that was actually there to be harvested. We hypothesized, we had 3 hypotheses. The first was, were we overstocking our stands? And certainly in the last 15 years, our average harvest age has lifted from 25 years to 30. And at the same time, our final crop stocking has lifted from around about the 250 stems per hectare to in excess of 400 stems per hectare. So clearly our stocking levels have gone up, but also we're starting to think about dry periods, and this isn't so much about have we had really good summers, but I've had a couple of trips now to South America, and in Brazil in particular, but not exclusively there. Their dry period has gone from 1 month to 4 months, and you can imagine the impact of that on tree growth. We also wondered about our models, the models that we've tended to use historically, ppm 88, produced obviously in 1988, and the 300 index, which was last reviewed probably 10 or 15 years ago. And we wondered if the new genetics were growing differently, or perhaps our current final crop stockings are more at the extreme end of the data that went into those model builds. You know, back in 1988, final crop stockings probably averaged 200 to 250 stems per hectare, whereas now we're looking in excess of 400 stems per hectare. So if we look firstly at overstocked stands, most of you will be familiar with the stand management diagram. If your stand density is below the dotted line, it's understocked. If it's above the dashed line, it's overstocked. And when you're in that overstock zone, or I call it the death zone, you start to get competition-based effects, reducing growth, but also increased mortality. And for us, with our increase in our average harvest age, also the increase in the average stocking, we're finding ourselves, or our stands are spending more and more time in that death zone. So I think clearly we are overstocking our stands. We then looked at drought, and a colleague once, or quite recently actually, said to me, Ian, you can always see the impact of drought in the pasture or in the crop because it goes brown, but you don't always see it in trees. And the example here on the right hand side is in the Yosemite Valley, which is in the high country of California. Most of us know that California has been in a drought for a number of years, but even in the the high country, where you expect more rainfall, we're seeing the impacts here directly of drought. So drought is killing those trees, as well as the secondary impacts of disease and insects brought about by the stress of drought. We're fortunate here to have Scion, and this is a trial in southern Kaingaroa. It's part of the Accelerator trial series. And here we have linked together dendrometer bands, so we can very accurately get tree growth right down to every minute or every 15 seconds, I think. We also have associated with a weather station. So we can actually start to link that information together, and you can see on the right hand side the table or the graphs, sorry, that show water deficit and the related growth when you go into water deficit. Just imagine if you multiplied those numbers by not 1 hour or 1 week or even 1 month, and all of a sudden those periods of water deficit became several months. You can see the impact that you're likely to have on tree growth. That forced us to look a little bit further, and so we grabbed NIWA's database, and we looked to understand how rainfall has or rainfall patterns have changed over the last, I guess this is the last 60 years. If you look at the colours, blues tend to be more rainfall than average, reds less rainfall than average. What would be nice is a mix of the pastel greens and yellows. But clearly you can see since 2013 that we've been in a sustained period of less rainfall than normal. Having shown that in all likelihood we are overstocking our stands, certainly too high a stocking for too long, and that we are in the middle of a dry period. Certainly the last 10 years have been a lot drier than at any point in the last 30 or 40 years. We went back to our permanent sample plot database to see what that data might be able to tell us about what's actually happening to tree growth. What we found is that up until 5 to 10 years ago, our models, so that's ppm88 and 300 index, were working pretty well. But since then, in particular, they've under-predicted mortality, but they've also started to over-predict tree growth or volume growth. And it appears, and I say appears because we've got a little bit more work to do, but it appears that our site productivity or site potential is actually reducing as a result of climatic conditions, particularly in this case drought. So what have we found through all this work? Look, it's clearly getting drier. The last 10 years shows that, but what is surprising is how quickly the climate has changed, even for a maritime climate like we have here in New Zealand. Our forests are probably overstocked for the sites that we occupy. Water holding capacity of pumice and scoria is lower than other sites, and particularly now that we're getting less and less rainfall, overstocking, and that's a mix of the final crop stocking and rotation age, probably needs to be looked at further. Signals are there that we're getting higher mortality and tree growth is slowing. And I think it's clear we need to know more. We don't know enough about the future. We don't know what the climate will be like going forward. We can presume it will be dry, but will it be drier? Temperatures will certainly be higher, and a lot can happen in a 30-year radiata pine rotation. And I think the learning for us will be that the practices of the past may not be the practices of the future. So what next for us? The first thing is we need to understand more than we understand today. So environmental monitoring, we need to understand more at a micro level the climate that we're operating in. We, over the last year, put out 3 weather stations within the forest. we expect to put another 3 out in the next 6 to 12 months, and I think we'll end up with a suite of 10 to 12 weather stations throughout the forest. We should be able to take that information, interpolate and link it to things like soils. We're sampling the soils in all of our permanent sample plots as we get round to remeasure in each. We're probably going to put more permanent sample plots in. I think we'll increase the frequency of measures in some of those permanent sample plots. You know, in late rotation, when you're measuring them every 3 to 5 years, that's just not frequently enough to relate back to changes in the environment. And also genomics. You know, we will be linking the genotype to the phenotype and to the environment, and work that science started in that space. We're certainly planning to continue to develop that thinking and the learnings that will come out of that. And what will come out, we think, are new growth models. So we'll be better able to understand the interactions of climate, site, genetics, and ultimately soil culture. And what that will help us to do is to develop mitigations to the problems that we're finding today that are only going to get worse as the climate continues to adjust or adapt. So now we get to the future thinking, although some of this is work that we're already doing. You know, what might the forest look like in 20 years' time? Look, I think quite quickly we'll end up with different or new silviculture. When I say new, it's actually, we'll probably go back to the past a little bit. I expect thinnings will be a core part of this. I expect we'll end up with lower final crop stockings, and we'll have more frequent or multiple production thinnings. And that will just enable us to keep the forest growing within the optimum zone within the stand management diagram. And I think that rotation lengths will also be affected. I don't believe we'll be running rotation lengths of 30 years for too much longer. I think it'll be a mix of lower final crop stockings and lower rotation ages will keep our forests out of the death zone as much as possible. I think nutrition will be a key part of moving forward. If you feed a person well, they're able to handle the stresses of life, less likely to get diseases and the likes. Trees are no different. I think there'll be more work understanding the soil and plant biome, and nutrition will be a core part of the work that goes on there. It's likely there'll be changes in genetics and species choice. There's an opportunity to use genomics and other techniques to future-proof radiata pine for drought tolerance, disease tolerance, and maybe even to reduce the impact of stresses on the trees. I think there will be new species, particularly short rotation species. One of the dilemmas with radiata is how long it takes to grow it and how long it takes to adapt the genetics. I think there will be an opportunity for particularly short rotation hardwoods to fill some gaps in a broader portfolio, and I think there will be new products. At the moment, a lot of the product that comes out of radiata pine goes into the residues, which is effectively cardboard, goes into 4x2s for housing, and not a lot else. I think we'll see more opportunities with radiata on shorter rotations, and more opportunities with other species, and the product mix that comes out of our trees will change dramatically. That's all I had to talk about today. I think climate change is real. You can argue about what's causing it, and certainly in our forest it's having a detrimental impact on the growth of our forests. That said, there's plenty of exciting opportunities to mitigate those negative impacts. Thank you.